All right, so on our notes yesterday, again, we stopped at number 33. So we're going to start at number 34. But before I do number 34, just a little reminder or where we finished yesterday. All right, a little reminder where we finished yesterday. We finished at 33. So we did number 33 yesterday. But let me do number 32 again, just as a reminder to where we stopped. Where we had this, where we have a parentheses and a number on the outside, I said we're going to call it distributed property. We're going to multiply the number on the outside to the numbers on the inside. So the forward, I'm going to multiply to the inside. So that gives me negative 4a. A 4 times 1, that gives me a positive 4, right? We call that distributed property. Hold on just a second. Okay, so that's where we stopped yesterday. So now what we're going to do here, which is factored, I'm 34. I'm looking at number 34. When it says factor the common factor out, for that one, what we're going to be doing is we're going to do the distributive property backwards. So again, we did yesterday distributive property. Now, when we're factor the common factor out, we're basically going to do the distributive property backwards. All right, so what does that mean? First of all, I look at my numbers, 14, negative 4, and 16. And then I ask myself, what's the biggest number I can divide them by? In this case, I know I can divide them all by 4. And then I look at letters. Do they all have letters? In this case, they don't. But if they do, I can take letters out as well. So in this case, I'm just going to divide by 4. So let me open my parentheses. And I'm going to divide every number. I'm going to divide it by 4. So that's going to give me 4 minus x squared plus 4x, close parentheses. Notice I'm doing the distributive property backwards. Again, I saw what's the biggest number I can divide them by. And then I did. My number I divided by, I wrote it on the outside. Now, how are you going to type this? Well, obviously the 4 on the outside, open parentheses, 4 minus x to the second plus 4x, and then close parentheses. So in red is how we write it. In blue is how we type it. All right, let's take a look at number 35. I'm like, all right, I can divide each by 8. Again, I'm doing the distributive property backwards. So I'm like, all right, I can divide each by 8. So I'm going to divide by 8. But then I notice they both have letters. Then I'm going to remove the smallest exponent, like the letter with the smallest exponent. In this case, 8 to the second. So remember, I'm doing my distributive property backwards. Each number, I'm going to divide it by 8. And each from the letters, I'm going to remove 2 of them. So the first one, 8 divided by 8 is 1. Let me write the 1 for this moment. It had 2 A's to begin with, right? 8 to the second. And I'm removing 2 of them. So there's no more A's. Then there's the plus sign. 8 divided by 8 is 1. It had 3 A's, but I'm removing 2. So I still have a 1A. Notice, numbers-wise, I divided each number by 8. Letter-wise, I removed 2 letters. Okay, Lauren, I got your message. Good. That's it. The only thing, though, when we simplify, let me simplify my answer a little bit. The number, the 1A, we don't have to write 1A. We don't have to write the 1. So if this was on paper, and if you guys were writing this, I will be expecting more like 8A squared, and inside parentheses 1 plus A. Because again, 1A, we just write an A. In red, again, is how we write it. So this was on paper. This is how you will write things down. Now, how we're going to type it in blue, I'm going to go 8a to the second, open parentheses, and 1 plus a. Again, I'm doing the distributive property backwards. We talked about distributive property yesterday. So when the instructions say factor the common factor out of each expression, I'm basically asking distributive property backwards. All right, let's take a look at number 36. Number wise, I see my numbers 15, 9, 24, and 6. Then I ask myself, can I possibly divide them all by the same thing? In this case, I'm like, yeah, I can divide everything by 3. Letter-wise, I noticed all my terms have a letter. And terms, by the way, terms are those things separated with the plus or minus. So now I notice that they all have a p, so I'm going to be able to remove p's. And I always go, the one I remove is the one with the smallest exponent. So p to the 1. So when it comes to numbers, I'm going to divide everything by 3. When it comes to letters, I'm going to remove 1p. So 15 divided by 3 is 5, and I remove the p. Minus 9 divided by 3 is 3, but then I keep 1p because it had 2 p's, but I'm only removing 1. Minus 24 divided by 3 is 8. There's 3 p's to begin with, but I remove 1, so p to the second. And then I'm going to my last term. There's a plus. My last term, 6 divided by 3 is 2. It had 4 p's to begin with, but I'm removing 1, so I have p to the third. Notice that I wrote on the outside 3p. What that meant is I'm going to divide every number by 3, and I'm going to remove 1p from each. In red is how you write this. In blue, let me go in blue, how we're going to type this. 3 p's on the outside, so that's not that bad. Open parentheses, 5 minus 3p minus 8p to the second. Remember, for exponents, we use p to the second. And then let me go plus p to the third. Again, for exponents, I mean, we use the caret symbol. That caret symbol that look like an arrow that's on the 6, so shift 6. That's how we type exponents. All right, let's do one more example. 64 and 72. I'm trying to divide them by the biggest number I can. I know I can divide them by 2. I know I can also divide them by 4. And I know I can divide them by 8. I'm going to divide them by the biggest possible number. So in this case, let me divide each by 8. Letter-wise, I see the first one has 2 R's. The second term has 1 R. So I'm going to remove 1 R from each. Let me open parentheses. So I'm going to divide each number by 8. And I'm going to remove 1 R from each. So 64 divided by 8 is 8. And I keep 1 R because it had 2. I took away 1. Minus 72 divided by 8 is 9. It had 1 R, so it doesn't have anything else. For you guys to know that you simplified it the most possible, you factor out the biggest possible number inside the parentheses, the numbers that are left inside the parentheses, there's no number other than 1 that you can divide them by. Right? I cannot divide them by anything besides 1. That's how I know I did the biggest possible number. All right, so that's it. If you were writing this, that's it. Typing it is not much different, right? 8R, open parentheses, 8R minus 9. So again, this, when it says factor the common factor out, we're looking at distributive property backwards. Okay. Let me just take a look at it. Okay, so now let's do find each product. Now we're going to multiply. So it's kind of like the distributive property, but I remember the distributive property only had a numbered on the outside. Now my first parentheses, that means I have two terms. So what I'm going to do, let me go in red how we will write this. Let me distribute the R first. So I'm going to distribute the R to everything on the second parentheses. R times 5R means 5R to the second. Notice for the R's, I added my exponents. And then R times a negative 5 gives me a negative 5R, right? A number times a letter, we just write both of them. And then let me distribute the negative 4. Negative 4 times 5R is negative 20R. Negative 4 times the negative 5 gives me a positive 20. And then, so I'm going to write equals, because probably we can simplify things out. I look at the term that has R to the second. There's only one term, so I'm just going to write it down, 5R to the second. And again, terms are those things separated with the plus or minus. Then I notice that here in the center, I have two terms that are like terms. They both have an R. The way I combine them, I just combine the numbers, negative 5 and a negative 20. That gives me a negative 25R. And then at the end, I have a plus 20. So that will be my answer. If I'm writing things out, that's what I will do. Now for typing, I will go 5R to the second minus 25R plus 20. We do write the biggest exponent first. Notice how my exponents on my letters, notice the exponents go from the highest to the lowest. All right, number 39. Let me distribute the 2n to the second parentheses. So 2n times 8n, that gives me 16n squared. Notice for the 2 times 8, I multiplied 2 times 8. And for letters, I just added the exponents, right? That's how we multiplied. And then 2n times 8, that gives me 16n. Then let me distribute the 4 to the second parentheses. 4 times 8n, that gives me 32n. 4 times 8, that gives me positive 32. I notice I can simplify things out. So let me write this as an equal sign or an arrow. That means I continue. The biggest exponent is 16n squared. The term with the biggest exponent is 16n squared. Then I notice 16n plus 32n. Those can be combined, right? 16 plus 32, that's 48. So let me write plus 48n, and then there's a plus 32 at the end. Combine your like terms. That way you guys will type this 16n to the second plus 48n plus 32. Again, feel free to always ask questions. Remember, I'm recording the lecture. I'm putting it in my YouTube channel, but then I'm also loading a link to Canvas. But feel free to ask questions, unmute yourself, or if you're embarrassed, send me a chat, and I can always answer things out in the chat. All right, number 40. Let me distribute the 6x from the first parentheses. Let me zoom in. 6x to everything on the second parentheses. 6x times 4x, that gives me 24x squared. 6x times 1, that gives me positive 6x. Then let me distribute the 3. 3 times 4x, that gives me 12x. And 3 times 1, that gives me 3. I notice these two terms in the center, I'll be able to combine those. So let me just put an arrow to say that I'm going to simplify. I'm going to have 24x squared, right? Nothing else has an x squared, so just 24x squared plus 18x, right? 6 plus 12 gave me 18 plus 3. So if we're going to write things out, that's how we will write it. Now, how we're going to type it, let me go in blue. 24x to the second plus 18x plus 3. Right, when you type this all together, no spaces. All right, cool. That's not bad. Let's take a look at number 41. Let me distribute the 6b to everything on my second parentheses. That's going to give me 36b squared plus 36b. Now let me distribute the negative 6 to the second parentheses. That's going to give me negative 36b minus 36. And let me just say, all right, I'm going to simplify things out. The biggest exponent is b squared. So there's only one term, 36b squared. But then I see these two can be combined. They both have a b with no exponent, so b to the 1. So I'm just going to combine the numbers. 36 minus 36 is 0. Now do me a favor. Do not, so big case, do not write just the plus b. You're thinking, all right, there's no number in front of the b, so that must be 0. Do not, because then you're telling me when we don't see a letter, when we don't see a number, I mean, just the letter, we assume there's a 1. So you're telling me that 36 minus 36 is 1, which is incorrect. So like I said, do not do that. Just don't write it out, right? 36b minus 36b, because it's equal to 0, just cancel them out, right? We don't write them. And this is, and then I still have a minus 36. All right, so that's how we would write this. If I'm going to type this, I'm going to go 36 b to the second minus 36. Nice. Now for the homework, these two topics that we just saw, the first topic is factoring the common factor out. And then the second topic is doing multiplying two polynomials, so two parentheses. In the homework, I think I put them in reverse order. So you guys are going to have find each product first. And then the second thing, you guys will have factor the common factor out. I think those two topics got confused on the homework. Oops. Just keep in mind, read the instructions and you know what to do. All right, since we talk about factoring, let's talk about factoring here. We're going to learn two ways of how to factor things out. First way is, what if there are 4 terms to begin with? We learned the word factored. We just did that a few questions ago. Factoring, we were talking about distributive property backwards. So let me, when there's 4 terms, let me look at this only the first 2 terms for right now. Only the first 2 terms. And I'm thinking, all right, number-wise, I can divide each number by 4. Letter-wise, I can remove x squared. Right? The first term has 3 x's. The second term has 2 x's. So that means I can take 2 out of each. So let me open my parentheses. Let me divide each number by 4. And let me take 2 x's away from each. I know 4 divided by 4 is 1. I'm not going to write this, the 1, unless I have to. x3 divided by x2 is just x to the 1. And then plus 16 divided by 4 is 4. And then there's no more x's because I removed them. Like I said, I was only looking at the first 2 terms. Then let me take a look at the last 2 terms. Negative 3x minus 12. Okay. Number-wise, I can divide them each by 3. So, matter of fact, I can divide them by a positive 3. I can divide them by a negative 3. Let me choose a negative 3 this time. I'm going to talk in a minute why I chose a negative 3 and not just a positive 3. For right now, let me just write a negative 3. So when we divide by negative 3, obviously we divide by 3, but we switch the sign. I cannot remove letters because my last term doesn't have a letter. So then I see open parentheses, negative 3x divided by negative 3. That gives me a 1x. Negative 12 divided by negative 3. Remember, because I'm dividing by a negative, I'm switching the sign. So that gives me plus 4. The reason why I divided by a negative 3 is because I wanted my parentheses to match. Signs, everything. If I would have divided by just a positive 3, I would have negative signs inside my blue parentheses. But I want both of my parentheses to match exactly. All right, so how am I going to write this? Now, one of my factors, I'm going to have 2 parentheses in my answer. One of my parentheses will be x plus 4. And the reason why, because that's the parentheses that matches. I want my parentheses to be exactly the same. I want them to match. So one of my factors, one of my parentheses is going to be x plus 4. The other parentheses, I'm going to write 4x squared minus 3. Now, you might be wondering, where did I get the 4x squared minus 3? That's basically what we factor out on each. 4x squared minus 3. If I'm typing this, that's how I'm going to write this, if I'm writing it. Now, if I'm typing it, my first parenthesis is going to be x plus 4. My second parenthesis will be 4x to the second minus 3. Now, the order of the parentheses does not matter, right? There's 2 parentheses in my answer. Which one do you write first? It doesn't matter. For the homework, when I do type in the key on my homework, I'm allowed to type in multiple possible answers. So I type both possible ways. I type, if this was a homework question, one of the correct answers is x plus 4, that parentheses first. Another possible answer is 4x squared minus 3 as the first parentheses. Again, when you have 2 parentheses, it doesn't matter which one you write first. For the homework, I'm allowed to type in multiple answers so you guys are going to see it correctly. For the quiz, I'm going to grade it later because on the quiz, I'm only allowed to type in one correct answer. So some of you will type it in right on the quiz and it will mark it wrong because you guys didn't put it in the order I typed in the key. However, I will take a look at the quiz later. After you submit it, I will take a look at it and make sure you get graded correctly. So if you wrote it correctly, it's just the order of the parentheses was different, I'm going to mark it as correct because I'm going to fix it. So that's something you might run into the quiz. All right, let's take a look at number 43. When there's 4 terms again, I look at the first 2 terms only. Number-wise, 40 and 15, I can divide each by 5. Letter-wise, I can remove a square. So divide each number by 5 and remove 2 a's. So it's going to give me 8a plus 3. Now looking at my last 2 parentheses now, number-wise, 56 and 21, I can divide each number by 7. So matter of fact, I'll even write it with the sign, positive 7. And inside parentheses, let me divide each number by 7. So that gives me 8a plus 3. My answer, one number parentheses will be 8a plus 3. If you notice, that's the parentheses that matches. My other parentheses will be 5a to the second plus 7. And again, that's from the outside, 5a squared plus 7. If we're going to write it on paper, that's how we write it. That way I'm going to type this. 8a plus 3. My first parenthesis is not hard to type. The second parenthesis, 5a to the second plus 7. And again, the order of the parentheses, if you're going to write 5a squared plus 7 first, you're fine. The order of the parentheses does not matter. All right, let's take a look at another example when we have 4 terms. Looking at the first 2 only. Number-wise, nothing I'm going to do. But letter-wise, let me divide each by v squared. Right, assume the first one has 3 v's, the second one has 2 v's. You can remove 2 from each. So that's going to give me v plus 8. Now, from the last two terms, I can divide them by 5. I can divide it by negative. I don't want negative signs inside my parentheses, so I'm going to divide each of these by a -5. So that's going to give me 1v. -40 divided by -5, that gives me +8. My parentheses do match. So let me put an arrow to say I'm going to continue. When I factor this, one of my parentheses is going to be v plus 8, which is the parentheses that matches, because it has to match signs, everything. My other parenthesis is going to be v squared minus 5. And again, that's from the outside. The way I'm going to type this, v plus 8, and then v to the second minus 5. Notice for the exponent, we use the caret, the symbol on the 6 on your keyboard. So I'm going to stop at 49. So we're almost there. Looking at number 45, my first two terms. Like I said, when there's 4 terms, I look at them 2 at a time. Number-wise, I can divide each number by 8. Letter-wise, I can remove p squared from each. So I'm going to divide each number by 8. Let me remove 2 p's. So that's going to give me 1p plus 3. Looking at the last 2 terms, plus 3 plus 9. I can divide each by a +3. So matter of fact, I'll even do it with the included sign. Let me divide each by 3. So that gives me 1p plus 3. When I factor this, one of my parentheses is p plus 3, which is the parentheses that matches. The other parentheses, I look at the outside, and I'm going to write 8p squared plus 3. And that way we type this, p plus 3, second parentheses, 8p to the second, 8p to the second plus 3. So that's when we have 4 terms. Now, when we only have 3 terms, we're going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to do what we call a diamond. It looks like an X, but it can be created into a diamond. Some people connect this into a diamond. I'm not going to connect it. So that's why it's called diamond. But what I'm going to be doing, I'm looking for 2 numbers. There's 2 numbers I'm looking for. When I multiply my numbers, they have to equal to -7. You guys see where I got the -7 from. When I add my numbers, they have to add to a -6. You guys see where I got the -6 from. When we have 3 terms, and my first term is a 1, it starts with a 1. The very first number is a 1. I'm going to do it this way. Okay, so I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiplied equals -7, but when I add my numbers is equal to -6. Because multiplication is a negative, I know my numbers that I'm looking for have different signs. And then I start thinking, all right, what are the factors of 7? Well, 1 times 7. So if I multiply 1 times 7 is equal to 7, so -7, that's good. When we have different signs, we basically subtract the numbers. If I was to subtract this, gives me a -6. Yeah, it works. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to write my numbers that I'm looking for are +1, -7. Right? When I multiply them, equals -7. When I add them, is equal to -6. Now my parentheses, my answer here, if I'm going to write this, I'm going to go n plus 1 and n minus 7. Now, because the initial one, it was n to the second, I'm going to write it as n to the 1. I just did the half of it. Right? So if my first exponent was n to the 6, as an example, my parentheses, I will start with n to the 3rd. I always start with the half. So n squared is n to the 1. And then notice my +1 and my -7, they came from my diamond. +1, -7. Again, the order of the parentheses doesn't matter. So which of the 2 parentheses you write first, it doesn't matter. All right, let's take a look at question number 47. I'm going to do my diamond method because my first number is a 1. So I'm thinking 2 numbers multiplied is equal to 54. When I add my numbers is equal to 15. You guys see where I got the 54 and you see where I got the 15. All right, so I start thinking, which are the factors of 54? Factors means which are the numbers that I can multiply equals 54. I'm going to start with 1. And then, all right, I can go 1 times 54. But when I add these numbers, it's not 15. All right, my next number is 2. I can go 2 times 27. But when I add my numbers, it's not 15. Then I say, well, what about 3? Notice on my list on the left, I'm going from 1 and on. Then I start thinking, all right, 3 times what equals 54? If we cannot think about it, right, we can say 18. But let's say we could not think about it. That way we find the other number, we go 54 divided by 3. 54 divided by 3 is 18. But 3 and 18, they don't add to 15. All right, so I continue. Then I say, well, what about 4? Because I'm looking at all my possible factors of 54. 54 divided by 4 gives me a decimal. Okay, so this one doesn't work. How about 5? 54 divided by 5 gives me a decimal. Okay, so that one doesn't work either. How about 6? Again, notice on my list, I started at 1 and I'm keep on going till eventually something's going to work. 54 divided by 6 is 9. All right, so 6 times 9 is 54. And when I add my number, 6 plus 9 is 15. So those are the factors that I was looking for. Positive 6, positive 9. All right, so now what's going to be my answer? Because the initial letter was x to the second, my first parenthesis is going to be x plus 6. My second parenthesis will be x plus 9. Notice where my plus 6 and my plus 9 came from. All right, cool. Now let's take a look at number 48. Let me do my diamond. I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiplied equals to 63, but when I add them is equal to 16. So I'm going to start with my factors of 63. 1 times 63. But when I add them, 1 plus 63 is not 16. All right. How about 2? 2 times something. I use division. 63 divided by 2 gives me a decimal. So 2 doesn't work. How about 63 divided by 3? All right. 63 divided by 3 gives me 21. But when I add these numbers, it's not 16. All right. So that one didn't work. How about 63 divided by 4? Unfortunately, it gives me a decimal. How about 63 divided by 5? That one gives me a decimal as well. How about 63 divided by 6? Now, 63 divided by 6 gives me a decimal again. So how about 7? 63 divided by 7 gives me 9. 7 plus 9 is 16. So those are the factors that I'm looking for. Positive 7, positive 9. Right? Because 7 times 9 is 63. 7 plus 9 is 16. I'm doing it the long way and I'm doing the list. But if you can think of them to begin with, just write them out. My answer would be x plus 7, x plus 9. So factoring a term with 3 terms, not that bad. Now here, let me do my diamond for 49. I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiplied is equal to negative 20. But when I add my numbers is equal to negative 1. I know my signs are going to be different because I multiply my numbers equals negative. If you can think of which numbers they are, just write them out. If you cannot think of it, then I'm going to do my list of factors of 20. I start with 1, and I know 1 times 20. When I subtract them is not 1. Keep in mind I said subtract because I know the signs are different. All right, so that one doesn't work. Then 2. I know 2 times 10. But when I subtract them, it doesn't work. Then I say, how about 3? 20 divided by 3 gives me a decimal, so that one doesn't work. How about 4? 20 divided by 4 is 5. So I know 4 times 5 is 20. When I subtract them, it's a 1. All right. But I want them to be negative 1. So I'm actually going to keep the negative. The big number is negative, and the small number is 4. right? 4 times a negative 5 is negative 20. Positive 4 minus 5 is a negative 1. So my answer will be a plus 4, a minus 5. I don't have any questions on the chat, but remember, you can always ask. I will always respond. I said I was going to stop at 49, where this is 49. So let me zoom out, take a screenshot of the work.